Oh, Howard, we are going to start. Hold on a second. We're learning a Sicho for bringing from Shabbos Parshas Vayakol Pekudai. This week is Parshas Pekudai. That year was Parshas Paros because Purim was early. It was 1 month Adar. And the Mevarchim blesses the month of Nisan. But we're going to be learning about Parshas Pekudai. The Rebbe says like this. Yedua Piskim Admar Azakin. It's known what the Alter Rebbe has taught. Shekvoid Kedushas Marichami Admar. That my father-in-law, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, Chazer Alav Kama Pa'amim, repeated it many times. Shetzrichim Lilmid Harom Parshas HaShavua. Hi, Sharna, we're just starting, page 197. That the Alter Rebbe says one must learn a lesson from the Parsha of the week. Therefore, the Rebbe says, we study the Parsha throughout the week, and we try to take insight. In order to get insight, to get a lesson, how we could understand from the Parsha. So this year that we're learning is 1961. So that year was Vayakol Pekudai together because it was 1 Adar. And it was also Mevarchim Nisan, which will happen if there's 1 Adar sometimes. And it's also Parshas Para. But what we're going to learn about is Pekudai. And the Rebbe says, a move in Shalim Hayrom Parshas Hashavua who Mikola Pratim Shba. We have to learn from all the parts of the Parsha. We must learn a lesson. Included in that is also a lesson that we have to have sometimes when we read 2 Parshas together. Like that year, they read Parshas Vayakol Pekudai together. Ubahagdama. There is this. Torah has all things in the Torah. Agam chalukas hasedros ein mederech mikra chasasham el b'diuk ubekavana. The divisions of the parshas are not by mistake. It's actually everything's exact. Behind shlachol reish sedra yesh nukuda hamyuchedes shelo. Every parsha has its point. We've learned about this many times. V'leish beglal goydel hakamas. It's not because the Torah is so long and so many words and sentences, so therefore we have no choice. So we have to divide it to the parshas. But that's not the reason. The reason is because the parsha has its space, and because it has its space, it has to tell a lesson for that space, and there's a message in that space. So that's why some parshes are longer, some parshes are shorter, because that's its message. V'gam shmo, not just that the parsha itself is a lesson, but also the name. Shekola sedra ena mishum shasedra peiseches b'tevazu. It's not because the parsha starts with these words, so that's why the name of the parsha is this. Elel hebach. On the contrary, b'shem ha-parsha merumas teichen kudus parsha. If you want to understand the point of the parsha, analyze its name. V'chein roish v'tchilas hasedra hu b'tevazu. And that's why God made it so. That the opening words and the name of the parsha is the name that it ends up being called, and that's because in that name you'll understand the insight of the parsha. This is what it says in the Zohar. Sheeshna gan, there's 53. Gan is 53. Nun is 50. Gimel is 3. Gan storm dairaisa. There's 53 parshas of the Torah. Ganos means a garden. Shemizem muvan. Shagan sturish b'Torah misbar meduyak. The Zohar says it not just because he's counting, but there's a reason why it's 53. B'chol shana every year. V'gam ba'is shanim shrehem stures misyamas nikri yachad. Even if there's certain years where some of the parshas are read together, and primarily on a year that's not a leap year. Even in a leap year, you have some, but in a year that's not a leap year, you have a few. Ki chalukas hasedra si mitzad inyanim. In your name hashainim, the difference of the parshas is because they're different subjects. Shebechos sedra, the Rebbe is getting to an idea. Shebechos sedra yesh nekuda hamyuchedes la. Each parsha has its point. El shlapamim karim kol nekuda b'shvua b'fnei atzmi. Elpamim kasher beis sedra same bechuberes karim beis nekudas b'shvuacha. So the Rebbe says like this: sometimes there's 2 points, and if we read the 2 parshas together, that means on that year there's 2 messages that has to be given over in the week. And when we have a leap year, like this year, and last week we read Vayakol, and this week we're reading Pekudai, is because the messages, the lesson, how we're going to live the week has to be divided in 2 different weeks. that Vayakel has its own message and Pekudei has its own message. We're then moving from this is understood. Parshas Vayakel Pekudei, because you have other parshas that are together, they're together. There's two parshas that are together that are mamish the same topic as Vayakel Pekudei. Vayakel Pekudei are two parshas that talk about not just Moshe, God telling Moshe about the Mishkan, but Moshe telling the Jewish people and how the Jewish people prepared the Mishkan. So seemingly Vayakel Pekudei, if one could argue, is one parsha that looks like one seems like one long parsha. The Rebbe saying no, Vayakel is one message and Pekudei is the second message. Yesh b'hem beis nekudis nefratis. So Shebzeh moving Sheparsh Vayakel Pekudei, the parsha Vayakel Pekudei. Afilu b'oisin shanim shnikr b'yachad. Even in the years that we read them together, it seemingly it's like one flow of a story, one flow of a message. Yesh b'hem beis nekudis nefratis. They have two separate messages. Even though in this case both the Parshas Vayakel Pekudei are talking about the making of the Mishkan and its preparing and its vessels, other Parshas that are together are Chukas Balak. Balak are two different parts of Bamidbar, but obviously there's a reason they're together. But Vayakel Pekudei is more open. Parshas Truma v'Tetzava, for instance, the Parshas Truma v'Tetzava, the Rebbe says. There also there's two parshas that talk about making God tells Moshe to make the Mishkan and its vessels. Where Parshas Vayakel Pekudei oiskes ba'asiyos hamishkan v'kelev. That Parshas Truma Tetzava talks about the commandment. Parshas Vayakel Pekudei talk about the actual doing of it. How they actually did it. So Parshas Truma Tetzava is the mitzvah, the commandment of it. Vayakel Pekudei is the actualizing it. Alpha became yesh behem beis nekudis shaynis. The Rebbe says, nevertheless, still doesn't change the fact that Vayakel is one message and Pekudei is another message. Kamoish Parshas Truma Tetzava, just like Parshas Truma Tetzava, that's never read together. Every single year, Truma Tetzava are read separately. Even though both of them are also talking about the Mishkan. The commandment to make the Mishkan. Okay. So now the Rebbe says, so what are we talking about? What is the fundamental difference between the Parsha Vayakel and Pekudei? Because the Rebbe is making an argument that seemingly is not clear. Parshas Vayakel is all about the Mishkan. Parshas Pekudei is all about the Mishkan. So what's the difference? The Rebbe didn't explain us. But Parshas Vayakel comes from Parshas Vayakel, last week's parsha. Misupra Shemoshe Hikos B'nei Yisrael says Moshe tells us that Moshe gathered the Jewish people. Umasr lehem esivei Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he gave over the commandment of Hashem. Lasois es Mishkan v'kelev, to make the Mishkan and its vessels. So he gathers the Jews and he tells them what they have to do. And therefore the Jewish people listened and did what Moshe told them. Well, Parshas Pekudei, what happens in Parshas Pekudei? Misupar tells us the next part, Moshe does the accountability. He does the accounting of everything that was brought and all the monies that were spent and all the materials, how they were used. Zahav v'chesed, the gold, the silver. How would they use, right? So openly the gold was used in the coatings or in the making of certain products, but we also had gold that was used as part of, they turned it into thread. So he says, what was the gold and silver, etc. used for? And after they prepared the Mishkan, how they anointed the Mishkan with this special oil, Shemen HaMishcha, Kalev, and also the vessels, B'Shemen HaMishcha. Shekrivu Shem Kabbanis, they sacrifices in dedication of the Mishkan. And how does the parsha finish Pekudei? That all these things that they've done to make the Mishkan ready as a Mishkan had an outcome. The outcome was that the presence of God rested in the Mishkan, and that was the whole idea of the Mishkan, is to bring godliness into the world. Kloimer, the Rebbe says, means to say like this: Nikudas Parshas Vayakel, the Parsha Vayakel, its point is avodas hanivroim, the work of the Jewish people. God told Moshe to tell the Jewish people what to do. They did it. Shebnei Yisrael banu as a Mishkan v'mimayim. They took their money and they built a Mishkan. Begufam, with their bodies, benafshim, and their souls, they put their effort into it. V'mimayim, what does it mean? Their money in the Yud Gimel Tesvav, the 13 or 15, depending on how you count. Hadvarim shenitvu, the things that were donated. Begufam, what does it mean? Their bodies. Hatircha, the effort. Begufam, with their body, live noises Mishkan to actually build it. Benafshim, what does it mean? Their souls. Ha'inyanim dinosu libam. The Torah says, Niso libam, go into your heart. Nidvas ruchai, give from your spirit. Chachma slave, use your intuition, your intellect. Different people had different talents, and they donated and contributed with their talents as well. That's all efforts that we did. This goes as far as what we can do. Means we can only go as far as we can do. And Hashem tells us to do and to make a dira this world, to make a resting place for Hashem in this world, we can do it to the efforts, the max of our limitations. What is the uniqueness? So that's V'yakol. V'yakol is about what we've done, the Jewish people did. What's Parshas Pekudai? It all is about Hamshachim Ilmaila V'kvoid Hashem Alas Mishkan. That is God's response. In Chassidus, it's known as Yiserusa de Tata and Yiserusa de Leila, an awakening from below and a response from above. In every relationship in the world, there's initiation. There's someone who starts, who goes, puts themselves out to inspire, and there's the response. Even though he says, even though the actions that he speak about in Parshas Yaakov was bringing godliness down. Every time we do something, right away there's a reaction. So as they were doing things in Parshas Yaakov, there was a reaction. It says, nevertheless, those were just responses. But the major response that God says, oh, you've done all this, now I'm going to give you extra, which is called the Serusa de Leila, the response from above that's beyond just the reaction. But actually, God said, oh, that's what you've done. Now, I'm going to show you what I'm going to give. That happened not from the efforts of the Jewish people, but God responding and started from when Moshe anointed the Mishkan and when they sacrificed the sacrifice. So he says, Kigam baifanim shazmon milsehi. So he says, the Rebbe quotes a concept in halacha that says, Hazmon milsehi, preparation is something. Right? The Jewish people, you can't take away. We prepared the Mishkan. We made it ready for God to come down. Physically, we actually built the Mishkan. We gave the gold, the silver. We made the Mishkan, made the house. But the Rebbe says, even though that Hazmon, preparation is something, how do you do? It's known. The way we bring down godliness, when we prepare something physical through a mitzvah, it's not, you can't compare it. You can't compare it to the light that's brought down, that's responsive to the actual mitzvah. For instance, let's give an example. I don't know if this is the example given, but I'll give an example off the top of my head. Making a sukkah, right? So you make a sukkah. If a person doesn't live in a city that there's any other sukkah, and also part of the Rambam writes in the laws of sukkah, the Rambam writes that making a sukkah is also a mitzvah. You have to make sure you have a sukkah. So a person hazmana is to make sure you have a sukkah in your house. So even though that's a mitzvah and you're preoccupied, we don't even say tachnun between the 4 days because a person's preparing a mitzvah. But that's not the mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah. So he says, same thing over here. The preparation is very important, but it doesn't come to the actual performance of the mitzvah. This is more than that. When it comes to preparing the Mishkan, the Kalev and the vessels, since they haven't been sanctified until Moshe pours on them the holy oil, or the avoda of the karbanos, or the services of the karbanos. So the Rebbe says the response that God has to our efforts in preparing the Mishkan, specifically because not like in Sukkah, all you have to do is put the schach and ready to sit down. But the Mishkan is not ready. Even after you prepare the Mishkan, it's still not ready. Moshe still has to pour in it the oil, and they have to do the sacrifices. So therefore, the response from God in Parshas Pekudai after the Mishkan has been sanctified and done the sacrifices through Moshe, that's a much larger response than the initial response to our efforts. lahamishkan v'kelev. And this is what the point is of the 4 points of the 4 parshas of the Mishkan. We have 4 parshas of the Mishkan: Truma, Tetzava, v'Yakov, Pekudai. The parshas Truma, Tetzava, and the parshas Truma, Tetzava, Meduber Oides, Sive Kadosh Baruch Hu. There talks about Moshe's commandment, God's commandment to Moshe, Al HaMishkan v'Kelev, about the Mishkan and its vessels, which is what? Again, the Rebbe in a Sicho, the Rebbe is going to try to make it simple for us to understand Hasidic concepts. So the Rebbe is going into the similar, what we've learned many times about Elul. The way it works is it's like in a relationship, right? In a relationship, there's preparation for intimacy, right? So you can't just show up. So you send flowers, you come home early, you help washing the dishes. There's a lot of preparation until a person becomes intimate. So too with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem, right? Comes the month of Elul. God says, go meet, go do tshuva. What's in who? You have to inspire me to do tshuva. So the Alter Rebbe explains that's the king in the field. God starts. He gives us the initiative. He gives us the inspiration to go and do tshuva by being in the field. But so too, he said, the Rebbe says, the Parshas Truma Tetzava is the Asirusa de Leila, the awakening from above, the inspiration that God gives us, before we start doing our work. God gives us the power that we should start getting things done. Gives us the power. But there's 2 parshas. Means we have Truma Tetzava that talk about God giving us the inspiration to do our efforts to build a Mishkan, but that itself is divided into 2 points. The commandment of Truma about building the Mishkan and the vessels of the Mishkan, Parshas Truma, and God's inspiration about making the clothing of the Kohen, which is the main point of Parshas Tetzava. So Parshas Tetzava, Truma, is God's inspiring us for the building of the Mishkan and its vessels. Parshas Tetzava is about the inspiration of the clothing. He doesn't go into what those, why there are 2 inspirations, but there's obviously a reason that there's, in general, you could say, there's what's called Makiv HaRachak and Makiv HaKarev. There's a distant encompassing space and there's a close encompassing space. A house, right? If you're not a giant, most people can fit in the same house. Clothing, right, has to fit the size. If you're large, you can't wear small. If you're small, you can't wear large. If you're medium, you wear medium, right? You have to wear sizes that fit you. Clothing is more meant to fit. So there are 2 different ideas of a makiv. There's an encompassing space that's a makiv harachik, which is a distant space where everyone could be in there. And then there's a fitted space, which is the begadim. He says, Beparshas Vayakol, that's Truma Tetzava. The inspiration from Hashem broken up into the vessels and the building of the Mishkan, and then the clothing of the Kohen. The Parshas Vayakol is Meduber Oides Siva Moshe L'Yisrael V'Kim Ativul Ayadav. Is Moshe telling the Jewish people, and he did it based on the inspiration of Truma Tetzava. They now did their efforts. Avoidus and Ephraim Dasirus Lotata. This is the work of the creations of the people, which is an awakening from below, right? So when someone comes home and is in a warm mood, so things start rolling. But Parshas Pekudai, what happens? Pekudai, Madrei Galyon is a higher level. Yoser das Rusal, a higher awakening. The first awakening from Hashem is just to inspire us to do, and then God responds after we've done. Sha'achar Rusal Tata, that comes after the inspiration from the initiation from below. The Rebbe says, however, so based on what we said here, so the means what the Rebbe is saying is like this: you have, let's say, a father, or a coach, right? So as the person is doing something, so there's response. Okay, you're doing it good, thank you. Oh wow, that's nice, great job, right? And then there's the completion of it. Hey Ari. Then there's the completion of it, when actually you can now put your efforts you've done with your efforts. After you upgrade it to make it complete, like they've done with the Mishkan, they did the sacrifices. Now God could actually rest in it. It means there's God's response to our efforts, and there's God's response to the completion of it. So he says, therefore, Amnam mibli habet al kach, without paying attention. That the response God has to our efforts is not as large as the response God has in Pekudai to the completion of our efforts. And then when it was sanctified with the carbonas and the oils. After became nevertheless, we still read the parshas together. Here the Rebbe says, sometimes in life, we could take in the moment, right? We could say, now I'm going to be focused on a Sarusla Tata. I'm going to be focused on what Vayakal is telling us. Vayakal is telling us our efforts. I'm going to focus on that. And then next week, we're going to focus on God's response. So he says, sometimes we don't have the time for that. We have to go fast. In 1 week, we have to do our efforts. In 1 week, we have to complete it. In 1 week, we have to have a God's response.
What happens when you take out 2 Torahs?
Two Torahs,
2 different sections.
That's for a different reason. That's if there's we're celebrating 2 days. That's if we're celebrating Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, or Chanukah and Shabbos, or one of the parshas that we read for before or around Purim time. That's also, there's a connection, but it's less of a connection because it's more connected to the time of the year, of the holiday, or what have you. But there's still some sort of connection, but the connection is less, as we won't make it as much as a lesson. It doesn't have as strong as a lesson as the parsha of the week. Parsha of the week is the parsha of the week, and these are addition readings that we have, especially connected to Chanukah or Rosh Chodesh or Purim time, etc. So he says, he's like this. The idea is not Hazman. Should I call Inyan the Mishkan Umigdash Udir B'Tachlenim? The Rebbe says, doesn't mean we have to go out of time. And in 1 week, we're going to do the building and the response of the Mishkan. Because the whole idea of the Mishkan is to bring godliness into the world, which means into space and time. And the idea is, Shebizman Gufa, in the time itself, it has limitations. The Rebbe says you have to have that in time itself. Here, the Rebbe, this is an amazing idea what the Rebbe is saying, basically. That there's sometimes we have to break the comfort of time and put into it. You have to say, even though time demands that you should be able to process it, no, you're going to be able to go quickly into building and completing and bringing down the response to the Mishkan in 1 week. It means in time you're packing into a short amount of time a lot of things. And sometimes the year like this year, the vote is differently. It's not that we have more time. The vote is differently. That the vote is that Vayakal is Vayakal, and Pekudai is Pekudai. There he goes. The idea is to bring from beyond time into time. That we have both our efforts and above. And that expresses itself when Yaakov and Pekudai are together. Nekudas, he says, Nekudas Parsha V'Yakel, the avodas and Evroim. The point of V'Yakel is the avoda of the people. Nekudas Parsha Pekudai, he amshacha milmaila. And the Rebbe says, when they're together, the idea of V'Yakel is our efforts. The idea of Pekudai is God's response. And the Chiddush is when we can put them all in 1 week. That while we're building, comes Wednesday already responding. The Rebbe says this is a preparation for the Gilui of Mashiach. Then it's going to be it says when Mashiach comes, it's going to be like this and like that. What's like this and like that? Like both according to heaven, both according to earth. And therefore, we can have, and when Parshas Yaakov Pekudai read together, we have both heaven, we have both earth. We have our efforts, we have God's response. And the Rebbe says like this, and the Rebbe continues. He says, the Inyan Zeh, this whole parsha is edited, this whole Farbrengen seems to have been edited and printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 3. So we're going to just continue reading because it's all connected to what we're doing. This says, Inyan Zeh Shach Kam Chadashah. This is also connected to the month of Adar, which we're in. Yedu, as is known, Shamoidim Shakol Hashana. This goes a little bit what Aaron was asking, that the holidays of the year, this is based on the Shalah. The Shalah Hakadosh says that it's not by chance that when a holiday falls out in a certain week, the holiday is connected to that week. So when we have, back to Aaron's question, we have a reading of a second Torah connected to a holiday, it's also connected to the week, but it's a different connection. It's a connection to the holiday, and that holiday is connected to the message of the week. The holidays of the year, they're not just by chance that they're in the winter, summer, or this week or that week. They're connected also to the parsha of the week. And what is the point of the month of Adar? Is Purim, which is coming up in the next couple of days, the next few weeks, sorry. Like it says, the month, the whole month, not just the day, the whole month that changed from bad to good. When the whole month of Adar comes in, we're happy, not just the day of Purim. So Purim spreads out in the entire month, or in our case, months of Adar. And what is the point of the holiday of Purim? So the holiday of Purim expresses itself in one of the ideas that's brought down, Ad la Yada. The Gemara says a person has to reach until they don't know the difference between blessing Mordechai and a curse on Haman. What does that mean? How can you not know the difference? You have to reach beyond limitations. It's Purim is unlike a regular holiday where we also have to be joyful. Shibag Bala, that has to have limitations. So much so, that in the days of the temple, that when there would be festivities, the institutions, whoever was in charge, the Bezdin, would send out shaitrims, police, to enforce that people behave properly, because sometimes in festive times, people could be inappropriate. And therefore, to make sure that there's no inappropriate behavior around the temple in the times of the holidays, there was a police force from the Bezdin that would make sure people were appropriate. But that didn't happen on Purim. That only happened on Yom Tov. Again, it doesn't mean that Purim is beyond. We're going to get out of the time and space. We're just going to be Purim. We're going to forget about everything today. It has no connection to limitations. Why? Purim will never, besides in Yerushalayim, and even in Yerushalayim, if it falls out on Shabbos, we have to pull it from the before Shabbos and after Shabbos. We read the Megillah before Shabbos. We celebrate the Suda after Shabbos. So even if the Purim it falls out on the week, and it's a regular weekday, you're allowed to do work. The Gama Purim work, it doesn't mean to go to work. It is in business. It means to do, allowed to turn electricity and stuff. It says a person shouldn't really work on Purim. The Gama Purim Timukafim, and even the Rebbe says that Purim that are celebrated on the 15th, like in Yerushalayim, the cities that were walled in, is B'Rov Hashanim, even on most years, Cain, who it also falls out on the week, and even if it falls on Shabbos, like I said before, part of the Simcha gets pushed to another day, Sunday, so we shouldn't mix Purim with Shabbos. So clearly the Purim is connected to the week, so it's not connected to out of time. 6 days of the week is time. Is in this world. This is the Rebbe's idea many times. That sometimes in life, when we face a challenge, we just try to escape the space. Okay, that's it. I'm closed. I'm turning off my phone. I'm turning off everything. I'm not connected to the world. I'm going to take 24 hours. I'm going to be cut out of the world. The Rebbe says that's not what Ad la Yada means on Purim. And the person says until you don't know the difference in blessing Mordechai and cursing Haman, doesn't mean that you're getting out of the world. It means you have to figure out how to put in to insert the idea of Ad la Yada in the week. That in the space of time, in the space of the weekday, you're beyond time. That's what he says. The idea is even within the limitations of time, that we should bring simcha that's beyond limitations till we reach the point we don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai in space, like Pekudai are together in one parsha. But we may have Purim. And the Rebbe always used to say that Purim doesn't only happen once a year. Purim happens once a year as a celebration, but the energy and the message and the power of Purim is something we should go through throughout the year. It says clearly in the Megillah, the days of these Purim, shouldn't leave the Jewish people, and its memory should never be forgotten by its children, not just every year, but throughout the year itself. What does that really mean? Not that every year we celebrate Purim only. Aside for this simple translation of that statement, that every year on the 14th and 15th of Adar we celebrate Purim. But also means draw from Purim. On Purim, you have an opportunity to take the efforts, the message of Purim, which is to insert beyond believable, out of limitations, within limitations, that your whole year should be like that. Your whole life should be like that. The whole year. What does this mean in our service of God every day? Like anything we have in Torah, there's the generalized statement, and then how do you implement it in the details of life? So the Rebbe says, how do we start off our day every morning? Is when we say, Bamiris Moida Ani Lefenecha Melech Avikaim Shechazarte Binishmas Bechem Rabba Munisach. Shuinin Haidava Bitl Shalma Matam Vedas. When we wake up in the morning, we don't sit there and we start thinking, there's a God. And this God, we just make a statement without thinking about it. Where we acknowledge, Moida means I acknowledge. Moida Ani Lefenecha Melech Avikaim, I acknowledge. Shechazarte, and I'm thankful. Shechazarte Binishmas, you gave me my soul back. The dugmas klodis in the adla yadish of Purim. That's like adla yad of Purim. That every morning you wake up without any question and you're thankful to God. And the moda ani, that thankfulness, that hoidah, that acknowledgement, has to be with the person throughout the day. Whenever you go out through the day and things are getting challenging, Adam Sirish Nefesh, till you're ready to self-sacrifice for the echad, for the oneness of God. And then not just the sacrifice, but to implement it into your soul, and all your might. Moving the Rebbe says understood means the Rebbe is saying that a person has to go with the Moedani, from Moedani all the way to the Shema Yisrael, and then like that the whole day. When a person goes out of their limitations of their mind could limit them, could limit us to our connection and to our resolve to be Jews. Is mismatim gamak b'asasman. The Rebbe says eventually the attitude of being beyond time starts to lessen the limitations of time. When you have that attitude, all of a sudden you'll realize that in a small period of time you could accomplish things that should take longer. In Israel, like I said before, the connection between the two parshas of Pekudai, that in the same 7 days, we're able to do the elevation of our efforts of Vayakel and the bringing down the light in Pekudai. Let's just go a little further. The Rebbe says like this. We're not going to go through the main part of the Sicho. Actually, was this part of the Sicho that we should have been learning, but we'll continue. There's Apia Omer Leo, based on what we said before. Now we said that what is Vayakel? Vayakel was about the efforts of the Jewish people, and Parshas Pekudai is talking about Hamshachim Lamayla, the bringing down the light from above, or the God's response through our service of the karbanos and the anointing the vessels. Now the Rebbe is going to go into talking about why in Pekudai do we talk about making the clothing of the Kohen and not in Vayakel. Even though it's seemingly a completion, it's continuing with Parshas Vayakel. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe said, or the reason we didn't include it in Parshas Vayakel, because the Rambam's opinion is there's no mitzvah to make the clothing. The mitzvah is that when you have the clothing, you have to, when you serve, you have to have clothing. There's an opinion also that there's no commandment to wear the clothing. The only a preparation means there's another argument for another time, but there's a discussion of what makes a Kohen a Kohen. A lot of times we like to say we're Kohen, but it's a little deeper than that. A Kohen is a Kohen, has to has the garments Garments represent not just the physical garments of the Kohen. Garments represents who you are, right? A person dresses according to what they're doing. So according to the Rambam, there's no obligation to make the garments. There's no obligation to wear the garments. You just can't serve. You're not a Kohen that could serve unless you're wearing the garments. So in order to be able to serve, you have to have garments. So he says, because there's no commandment to make the garments, it's only that they have to wear them when they serve. The Rebbe says, therefore, we don't talk about a Vayakil, because in Vayakil we talk about the mitzvahs that we have to do for preparing the Mishkan. And the clothing is not the mitzvah, it's just that in order for them to serve, which is connected to Pekudai with the service of the Kohanim, create the response of Hashem. So therefore we talk about the clothing, because that's when they have to know what they can't do the service without them. However, the making of the other parts of the Mishkan, the outside and the vessels, that is actually a mitzvah. You're doing something Torah when you're doing it. Therefore we talk about a V'yakal. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe says also, we must say that, because in the counting the Moshe did on the making of the Mishkan, he first does the counting on the making of the Mishkan, and then only afterwards do they make the clothing. The Rebbe says, and this will answer. In Parshas V'yakal, whenever they did things, the Jewish people did things and created the Mishkan, it doesn't say that they did like God told Moshe. But by the clothing of the Kohanim, when it comes to making the clothing, all the special, unique clothing, especially for the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, it always says that this is what they did exactly as God told Moshe. Only when it comes to the Mishkan itself, only at the end it says that they did everything like Moshe said, but not after each individual article was made. The point being is, skip the brackets. לפי שהמשכן מקדש פרס ויעקל אף שהם מציע של תורה. מכל מקום אין בהם הצפצה ויסקשרוס כאשר ציווה. לקדוש ברוך הוא, עד שימשך בשמן המשחה, הנקודה דפרשת פקודה, וכן בכל עניין פרשת זו יש להם כאשר ציווה. So therefore he says, because in Parshas Vayakal we still haven't been able to bring down the light of God, because it hasn't yet had the sacrifices and the oil, so therefore we don't say Kasher Tziva Hashem, because Tziva doesn't just mean command, Tziva means also to connect. We haven't yet made the connection. But in Parshas Pekudai, when we talk about the clothing is part of the connection. Okay. The Rebbe says, what's this idea? We're going to learn for a second further. We'll learn one more paragraph. What's this mean in our service to God? The Rebbe says like this. This is the main point. You do what's known. Each and every one of us, we are a tabernacle to God. We are a temple. Moshe Kosev, like it says, and the Rebbe quoted this idea many times. V'shachanti b'socham, I will rest amongst them. B'soich kol echad v'echad Yisrael, within every single Jew. God doesn't say b'socho, I will rest inside the temple. I will rest inside them. And how does God rest amongst us? We have to create our Mishkan, our temple. There's three parts of the temple: a Mishkan, Kliya Mishkan, and Ubigdei Kahuna. There's the temple, there's the actual building, there's the vessels, and there's the clothing. Shehem Behesim the Gimel Yonim the Mazon. This goes together with the three ideas of sustenance for a person, which is food, which is like the vessels of the Mishkan, Levush, which is the garment of the Kohen, and the house, which is the Mishkan. So if a person's survival is based on three things: you have to have clothing, you have to have a place to live, and you have to have food. End of story. If you have nowhere to live and you don't have clothing, you're not going to be able to survive the elements. If you don't have food, you won't survive. Those are the three essential things a person must have to survive. Mazan, what is food? The person becomes one with food. You eat it; it goes inside of you. In Yana, what does that mean in service of God? Havan Vasaga, our understanding of godliness. It doesn't stand on the outside of the person that impresses the person from an outside force. Understanding, you have to internalize it. A person has to totally get around the concept that they're trying to understand. Like it says in Tanya in Parakeh. Therefore, we have all the different vessels of the Mishkan. Each one represents another connection to our service of God. The menorah represents the menorah, the mizbeach, the small mizbeach, the temple, the ark. These are all parts of us internalizing our connection to God, like internal organs. Then we have the levush, the garments, the clothing of the Kohen, which, like I said before, that's makav akarev. That's a close encompassing. The hainu, it means even though it's encompassing the person, clothing is outside, protects the person from the outside. Also, if you meet Adam, each person has their own clothing, meaning to say each person has their own size. A tall person must have tall person clothing. And a small person has smaller person clothing, and all the other different parts of sizes, etc. We're talking about the clothing of a Kohen. We're talking about each Jew who is a Kohen, really. God says you are a people of Kohanim, and everyone has their own temple. Each person has to have garments that fit them, not physically, but spiritually. We're not all the same. So the garments have to be for each one of us, things that are important to us, how we serve Hashem. There can't be any separation between the clothing and the skin. It's brought down when it says midei bad. Midei means midei, it's the measurement. Everything has to measure according to the person. It's beyond intellect. It's not about you internalize it. It's connected to each person according to it. Means each person needs an encompassing energy that fits them. Some people get inspired by other things, right? You can have a situation where two people go experience it, and one person is going to be inspired, one person won't be. Why? Even though it's an outside inspiration, but we're made up differently, so therefore we respond differently. He says it's like the idea of knowing the God from eliminating any other option. He goes, what's an example of an encompassing garment? Everyone who wears, the men who wear tzitzis. A talis covers a person. Not everyone has the same size talis, right? You wear a tzitzis, right? You go into the store that sells tzitzis. They ask you, what size are you? We know that there's a halacha, how large the beged, how large the garment has to be for it to be kosher tzitzis, for tzitzis. That's garments. So garments represent clothing that fits you. The temple itself, like I said before, it's a more distant encompassing space. A lot of people could be in the same space. You don't build a house for tall people. A tall person and a short person could all live in the same house. That many people at one time could be in a house. This is an energy that's beyond our consciousness. The whole idea is that you shouldn't mix your mind, and there's certain things that are just encompassing space. Like it says, everyone can sit in one sukkah. There's certain energies that are not about that you have to understand it. Just be there. Be part of it. It says two opposite things. These are like the mitzvahs of forgetfulness. Everyone is equally told not to try to forget. And also the mitzvah of the melech, of the king, like if you forget, let's say also you forget the harvest. Also the mitzvahs that the king does for everyone. Mitzvah shikha, the whole mitzvah of that forgetfulness, that you forget certain things, like you forget the harvest, you forget the wheat it's all about that you don't pay attention to. And if a person says, I'm going to place a piece of wheat on the floor as if I forgot it, that's not the mitzvah shikha. the mitzvah of when a person does their harvest and they forget the wheat in the yard, so that you have to forget it. You can't pretend like you forgot it. There's someone I once saw, I don't know the marker of it. I once was in a shul, and someone dropped a quarter or something. Someone ran after them and says, here's the, you dropped a quarter. He says, no, don't give it back to me. If it dropped out of my pocket, that means it's supposed to just drop it. That's like the mitzvah of Sicho. I forgot that someone else will find it. Someone else will use it. So he says, so to the commandments of the king. One of the qualifications of a king is a king can't want to be a king. It says anyone who chases honor runs away from him. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I gotta go to another meeting, but the idea is that Pekudai are parshas that are our avodah, the avodah of Hashem. There's the begadim. There's ways we serve Hashem. There's the mishkan that's within us. There's the vessels that are the parts that we internalize. We understand they have our mind, our hearts, places that we build a temple for Hashem. We have to have garments. We have to create garments that are protecting us to fit us as individuals. Know who you are. Know the garments that fit you. And then, of course, we have the space, the general space of holiness and of kedusha and of comfort, like a home, temple, which is part of. Laila Tov, everyone. Good Shabbos and happy Chodesh Adar.